presentation and share it with your friends so that way the Google algorithms kick in. With that, I will hand it over to Swamiji to deliver the lecture today. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Sanjay. Good evening. Yogena chittasya padena vacham malam sharirasya cha vaidikena yopakrotam pravrammuninam patanjalim pranjaliranatosmi stuve patanjalim vyasam shankaram cha munitrayam kartrasutrasya bhashyasya kramat vivaranasya cha. We were discussing the 25th Sutra of Kaivalyapada, the 4th chapter. We just started Tada Vivega Nimnam Kaivalya Pragbhavam Chittam. So that is the 25th Sutra. The literal meaning is then at that time. So we reach a stage which is very close to liberation, Kaivalya Bhava. So it's a reference to the 24th Sutra, Vivega Darshinaha Atma Bhava Bhavana Nivrittihi. So when a yoga practitioner, when a yogin realizes the fact that he is not an evolute of Prakriti, mind or senses or just intellect, but he is actually the self-effulgent Atman, Purusha. At that point, when he reaches that state of discriminative faculty or discerning wisdom, at that time, all the wrong notions will disappear. And then what happens? That's a state when the mind begins to gravitate towards proper understanding. This is the implication of this 25th Sutra. Now, what it means is, when we practice the Viveka and Vairagya, non-attachment and this discerning wisdom, then mind becomes calm and quiet. Mind loses its natural tendency to waver, to change emotionally, to get confused or facing conflicts. That situation goes away. Mind attains a state of calmness and tranquility and peace. This is what really happens. Now, we can imagine in actual practice what this means. Normally, our mind creates many alternate realities in front of us. This is very often a fact according to our emotions and feelings, according to the wavering tendency of the mind. Because of the wavering tendency of the mind goes on creating alternate realities, and we identify with different changing phenomena. And this is what really happens when we face conflicts, doubts, skepticism, self-doubt, anxiety, and so on. When a person reaches this state, when he is able to transcend this wavering of mind, the emotional way of disconnected thought currents flowing in one continuous flow. Disconnected thought currents, that's very important. That's what happens to human mind. Thought currents come one after another, but they are disconnected. So that's what we call normally confusion, perplexity, anxiety, and so on. All these will go away, and mind enjoys a sense of peace and tranquility. We will go to this, we will come back to this subject when we discuss the 27th Sutra, Hanam Esham Kleshavat Uktam. So, how to get out of this tendency of the mind. So that's one thing. So those who have got doubt, you can ask again. Of course, just I mentioned, we discussed this sutra earlier in the last session. 26th sutra is tat chidreshu pratyandirani samskarebhya. Tat means those obstructing emotions, obstructions, obstacles, emotions and feelings that stand in the way of tranquility and peace, obstructions that create conflicts and anxieties in the mind. They what happens, they mislead us into believing in the wrong notion, believing the reality of this unreal worldly phenomena, which actually come and go. So every minute when we experience an emotion, we completely identify with that emotion. And at that time, we lose our true identity and we identify ourselves with every changing phenomenal entity. In fact, in real practice, this is what happens. I mentioned this earlier. Suppose we get information, we get news that we have lost money in the bank. Then that state of misfortune becomes so huge in our mental reason, we completely identify with that state. And then sometimes, some happy news when we got suddenly some huge amount of money, people. Immediately the joy overcomes our mind. So this momentary obsessive identification with every single changing and disconnected phenomena, that's what is called obstruction, confusions. Now, this particular sutra says this problem, these obstructing thoughts and confusions, they emerge not only from what we are experiencing now, but also from what we have experienced in the past. In fact, the implication of the 26th sutra is simple. Many of the obstructing thought currents emerge from previous experiences, either from this life or from previous life. That means the formal samskaras, experiences, good and bad experiences which are already accumulated in the mental system, they emerge and they create these obstructions, and all these obstructions disappear when a person gets this Viveka Darshanam. The Viveka Darshanam is a term used in the 24th Sutra that is very important. The discerning wisdom. In simple life, in Vedanta we call Nitya Anitya Vastu Viveka. In Vedanta, that's the first qualification for a spiritual seeker. It's mentioned in the Viveka Chudamani, the first one. An ability to keep in mind what is actually real, what really matters, what is actually important, and what is relatively unimportant or irrelevant. In fact, this state of discriminative faculty or discerning wisdom comes to people as a result of education, as a result of maturity. But spiritual practices help us to reach this stage in a more comprehensive manner and at a much earlier stage. Every person can reach some degree of this Vishesha Darshanam, maturity. The understanding what is real, what is unreal, what really matters, what is relatively unimportant. That sort of faculties, we call it wisdom, we call it maturity in the very ordinary empirical language. That's what we use. But this discerning faculty assumes a spiritual quality when we practice yamas and niyamas. That is the foundation. We will come to that, as I mentioned, when we discuss the next sutra. So actually, this Viveka Darshana helps us to uphold and stick to what is real and ignore what is relatively unreal. For example, there is a health problem. immediately we may get shocked, or it can affect our mind. But suppose we remember, we remember in body is subjected to changes. Body doesn't remain the same for too long. Health goes and returns. Of course, there is a stage when health is completely lost. That's due to old age, etc. But normally, every minor problem can have a solution, can have a remedy. This will forget when we get too much worried about a health problem or any similar problem. We get too much worried. We lose the job. Suddenly we forget that the state of joblessness is not going to be permanent. We may get a job again. But that is forgotten for the moment, and we identify ourselves with that state of being without a job. So now these samskaras, these feelings, these conflicting feelings can be a projection of samskaras. Now what is samskara? We have to keep in mind. I have to remind you again, there are fundamentally two samskaras that Patanjali is dealing with. Of course, the yoga philosophy is dealing with. One sort of samskaras which are relatively superficial, tendencies and impressions that influence our actions, feelings and thoughts, our speech and habits and so on. Mostly those samskaras are the hangover that caused by experiences that we have already undergone in this life. Childhood memories, memories related to young age when you study in college, universities, memories that remain in the mind, good and bad memories, both can remain in the mind, mostly coming from our own experiences during the early part of our life. One set of samskaras. And many of these samskaras may influence our mind, but we can feel them. They are more or less obvious. And frequently psychologists, psychiatrists can take you back to those memory levels, and then they can solve many problems of the mind by taking a patient to the early days, and then through counseling many of these problems can be solved. But yoga psychology speaks about another kind of samskaras. And those samskaras are not necessarily linked to our present life. They are much stronger, they go much deeper, and they influence our actions and thoughts in a way that is not so very obvious. They are invisible but strongly felt tendencies and impressions that we cannot really explain, that appear to be inscrutable. Judging by our experiences. Now, some of the phobias, some of the obsessions, some of the good samskaras, you feel a great attraction to something higher, some spiritual, cultural, aesthetic, literary tendencies, which cannot be explained in terms of our training or our heredity in this life. So there are also good and bad samskaras. So now in this 26th sutra, Patanjali is talking about those samskaras which come from previous life cycles, and they are all accumulated in a system which is called karmasya. They actually create what we normally call karmic blocks. So karmic blocks are certain invisible mental phenomena that we cannot actually explain or easily find a solution with the help of psychiatric or psychological help. So tachidreshu, that means tachidreshu samskarebhyaha pratyantarani. So many of these obstructing thoughts, samskaras, they emerge from previous samskaras, previous tendencies which are maybe accumulated in our mental system, And these samskaras which are accumulated in the karmasya, which are spread over several life cycles, which can have impact on our experiences for several life cycles, they find fulfillment, not necessarily in one life but in several life cycles. So those samskaras are very strong. And when a person reaches this Viveka Darshana, the Viveka Khyadi, one gets out of this. That's it. And that is what actually leads us to the fundamental spiritual goal of yoga, that is Hanam Esham Kleshavat Uktam. That is the 27th Sutra. So this is an important thing to remember. So the 26th Sutra tells us that many of these obstructing thought currents and tendencies coming from previous life cycles, which are not visible, which are not obvious, but somehow we feel a kind of mental block. Now, I want to mention a few things about how they are dealt with in modern psychiatry. I am not a professional psychiatrist, what I mean. But very often, many of these problems are dealt with the help of medicine, counseling, and so on. But as I mentioned, as everyone knows, in modern psychology cannot and doesn't consider previous life cycles as a possibility. So very often the solutions and remedies become superficial. It is only helpful for postponing a problem which will return again with greater intensity. But once you understand that there are certain samskaras and tendencies which are accumulated in the mental system, once we recognize that, then we feel a relief. We should not get away with the impression or superstition. Really speaking, when we are looking for a solution at the psychological level, when we find an explanation, the explanation itself becomes a solution. That's an important thing. At the mental level, when we get an explanation, the explanation itself becomes a solution. Oh, maybe this is why I have this. So once you understand, then it's no longer a big threat to us. Otherwise, phobias and obsessions, many of them do not find any real explanation in modern psychology and psychiatry. This is important thing. Only our ability to be impacted by those problems, that ability to be impacted, to be sensitive to the problem, that is benumbed. And that actually damages the mental system. On the other hand, once we understand, well, it may be due to some samskaras, tendencies coming from another source, not this life. Once we understand this, then we are able to accommodate that problem into our system, then the problem is gone. That's why we are able to accommodate the problem as a possible solution. Then the problem no longer exists. That's an important thing to remember. That is tachidreshu pratayandrani samskare. Samskare bhiga here means obstructing thought currents coming from samskaras which are coming from another former source. That's the implication here. Which we call karmic blocks. Now what is a karmic block? Karmic block is an invisible obstruction, a state of helplessness. But once we understand the possibility of a karmic block, once we get an explanation for it, we are free from it. That's an important thing. We are free from it. We find an explanation for something that we could not really explain earlier. So the 27th Sutra is very important because it will take us back to the original purpose of yoga practice. 27. Hanam Esham Kleshavat Uktam. Yesham Hanam. So, Yesham of this. Here, the implication is Vitthana Samskaras. That's a real, that's what is referred to the word Yesham. Of these This is sixth case. Sashti Vibhakti Bahuvajana. Means of these, of what? Vyuthana samskaras. What are Vyuthana samskaras? Certain old samskaras that emerge the mental system from time to time, prompting us to do certain things, prompting us to think in a certain way. Immediately, that obstructing thought currents can be neutralized by a Nirodha samskara. Nirodha samskara is something that takes you towards yogaha chitta vritti nirodhaha. Nirodha samskara helps us to transcend, to free ourselves from the negative samskaras, conflicting samskaras, which are vyuthana from previous life cycles, which are mostly from karmashyas. So, from our previous life cycles, certain samskaras, certain tendencies emerge, which we know to be not good. Now, when you actually practice yamas and niyamas and you go through yoga practice, what happens? A counter samskara, a counter mechanism is developing in our mind. Oh, it's not good. Suppose you have a tendency for greed, let us say. A person who is practicing yamas and niyamas immediately, asteya and aparigraha. There are two virtues which belong to yama. Asteya means non-stealing. I mean not having desire for something that is not ours. Aparigraha means not, it is non-possessiveness. I mean non-receiving of gifts. That's a literal translation. But what it actually means is not having too much of desire for things without any discrimination, going after things though we don't need them. That tendency is gone when you practice aparigraha. And again, secretly having a desire for something that's not ours. That is gone when you practice asteya. So what happens, when you get established in these yamas and niyamas and Ashtanga Yoga, what happens is tendencies related to greed, the possessiveness, will be immediately neutralized by a counter tendency. Why? Because you're practicing asteya, aparigraha. Oh, I should not receive things which I don't need. I should not have a desire for things which are not mine, non-stealing and non-possessiveness. Again, always being anxious, dissatisfied, skeptical, doubtful. Immediately we practice, Chantosa, contentment. Being always contentment is important virtue. So the contentment, the Chantosa, is a counter virtue which crushes, it destroys the impact of skepticism. So, like that, if a person really practices these 10 disciplines, I mean yamas and niyamas, ahimsa, sasteya, asteya, brahmacharya, aparigraha, saucha, santosha, tapaswadhyaya, isapadithana. Means non-violence, non-stealing, truthfulness, then non-possessiveness, pure life, purity, mental purity, physical purity, contentment, then austerity, dedication, then connecting with positive ideas, repeating or practicing some sacred word symbols called swadhyaya, and then if you actually are a traditional believer in any religion or God, a sense of resignation. So what happens? That completely neutralizes all these Vyuthana samskaras. So Vyuthana samskaras are actually conflicting tendencies that emerge from mental system again and again, which should be transcended for spiritual progress, for attaining spiritual progress. So Nirodha samskaras will neutralize Vyuthana samskaras. How this happens, we'll find out very soon. So Esham Hanam. Hanam means this solution, getting rid of this. This happens. Klesavad Uktam. So it is a reference to one sutra it comes in the Sadhanapada, the third sutra. Avidya asmita raga dvesha abhiniveshaha kleshaha. Kleshas are described in the third sutra of Sadhanapada. Avidya, ignorance. Of course, ignorance should be taken as the fundamental problem of mistaking ourselves to be an evolute of Prakriti. Either we mistake ourselves to be the emotions from the mind that emerge in our mind, or we identify ourselves with some sensory objects, that is one of the Panchamahabhutas, or we sometimes we identify ourselves with our intellect that is appreciating or maybe not appreciating certain things. All these changing entities which are evolutes of Prakriti. That wrong identification should go away. Disappearance of that wrong identification is what is meant by Hanam in this particular sutra. So Asmida Raga Dvesha Abhinivesa. Raga Dvesha Abhinivesa are to be focused here. Raga means extreme likes, infatuation, that spiritually and psychologically imprisons you, that makes you prisoner. A person who has a obsessive infatuation, liking for certain things. Very often he knows that it is absolutely wrong to have that kind of attachment. Then it becomes more painful. See, when you are aware of the fact that it is wrong to be attached, and still you are attached, and you feel a tremendous, a deep sense of total helplessness. Drug addiction, alcoholism, extreme, attachment to internet in modern times, iPhone. Many of these things can take various forms of infatuation, raga, and becomes a klesha. It is actually invisible chain that binds us. The problem is, we recognize it's a problem, but we cannot get out of it. Actually, if we don't recognize the problem, then it is possible to get out of it. When you recognize it's a problem and you cannot get out of it, actually it is a much more miserable stage. That is raga. Dvesha is opposite. The same thing, the other side of the coin. You mean this kind of phobia, different phobias and different obsessions. Certain kinds of manic problems can be linked to this extreme hatred, aversion to certain things. You know it's absolutely ridiculous to have that kind of obsessive hatred. Still you have it, and that's a very painful thing. So awareness of it and then total incapacity to get rid of it, to avoid it. Together becomes an invisible prison. Now, this should be got rid of. That's the real purpose of Hanam. So, those of you who have remembered my introduction to the Sadhanapada will remember. We discussed the fundamental goal of yoga is Chitta Vritti Nirodha. And going beyond the vrittis, going beyond the Vitthana Samskaras. Vrittis and Samskaras are interlinked. When you are free from vrittis, you are also freed from Samskaras. Then also you are freed from kleshas. After all, these kleshas, the raga, dvesha, abhinivesha. Abhinivesha is a tendency to avoid, to run away from. Raga, you move towards something. Dvesha, you fight it. Abhinivesha, you avoid it out of fear. So these are the three foundations of these kleshas. And our vrittis and samskaras take different forms based on these kleshas. So that's why Patanjali in this sutra, we are coming to the end of it actually. Hanam esham kleshavad uktam. We already mentioned earlier, uktam means, actually it's a reference to Sadhanapada 10th sutra, I think. Okay, then we don't have time to go through them all. Anyway, I shall try to explain here. Now, what is this Hanam? What is this freedom? First of all, we discuss the Dukkha Chadurvyuha. I mean, these 4 types of Dukkha. More or less, it runs parallel to the Buddhist doctrine. That means all experience is Dukkha. Now, one important word in this, Heya. Heya is that which is to be eradicated. That is future Dukkha. I mean, all problems that stand in the way of our coming back to our true identity, that is, we are Purusha, we are not Vrittis, we are not Vasanas, we are not Samskaras, we are not the mind or emotions and feelings or external sensory objects. We are that Purusha. Okay, now, but we have a wrong notion. We identify ourselves with different evolutions of Prakriti. And that is to be eradicated. That is Heya. Then, Heya Hetu, I mean, the cause of this Dukkha, the cause of this problem, that is association between Drashta and Drishya. And it associates called Avidya, which is the fundamental origin of kleshas. Hanam is eradication of this dukkha. That is the meaning of Hanam. The word is used in yoga. Hanam is eradication, getting rid of this dukkha. Now what is dukkha again? Dukkha, the Sanskrit word dukkha literally means grief, sorrow. We should not take the literary meaning, and the meaning in which it is used in literature. In Yoga Sutra, it means a problem that you become aware of when you enter spiritual life. So what is the problem? My mind identifies itself with everything that happens every moment. And I identify myself with my mind. And mind identifies itself with every momentary experiences. Now happy, next minute unhappy, now extreme liking for certain things and extreme aversion to certain things. Like that, mind is always in a flux. That state is called dukkha. So dukkha here means qualitatively is different from dukkha as understood in the dukkha, the Chattvari Arya Satyani, the 4 noble truths as taught by Buddha. That's again different from the word dukkha as used in normal Sanskrit literature. Here dukkha is our tendency to identify ourselves with our mind, and so our mind itself identifies with all these changing experiences. Now something unpleasant happened, I'm completely broken. After some time something pleasant has happened, I feel overjoyed. And this goes on changing. This wavering nature of mind. This is not a very happy situation. So that's what Patanjali says. This problem should be eradicated. So Hana means that eradication, removal of that dukkha. By what? By eradication of the fundamental root of that dukkha. What is that? Avidya. What is avidya? Avidya is again this wrong identification. That should be gone. Then we will identify ourselves what we really are. And what is our true identity? Purusha or Atman. This meaning. And then the fourth element of this dukkha chaturvyuha, what we call quadrangle, this quadrangle of dukkha. You can see this is a quadrangle in yoga. Is hanupaya, I mean the means, methods, a proper discipline for the eradication of this problem. And what is that? It is unbroken practice of Viveka Darshana that we discussed just now. That means we should clearly discern our true self from our mind, our senses, and other evolutes of Prakriti. We are the Purusha, the self-effulgent Atman. That discerning wisdom is the means for eradication of dukkha. Now, what is the method employed in the yoga system? Ashtanga yoga. That is yama, niyama, asana, pranayama, pratyahara, dharana, dhyana, samadhi. Of which is called samyama, dharana, dhyana, samadhi. The 6th, 7th and 8th together is called samyama. And in the process, there are 3 types of modifications that happen, of which Nirodha Parinama is the highest that we are actually coming to. When we obtain Nirodha Parinama, what happens is we attain this Samprajnata Samadhi. Before Nirodha Parinama, another state comes, that is Ekagrita Parinama. Before that, another one, Samadhi Parinama. So in an ascending order, the first stage is Samadhi Parinama, and after that Ekagrita Parinama, and after that Nirodha Parinama. When we reach Nirodha Parinama level, Yogaka Chitta Vritti Nirodha. This means here. Now again I have to mention, the foundation is always Yama Niyama. To what extent we are actually able to practice and succeed in yoga, to what extent we can feel the tranquility and peace and fulfillment, it all depends upon yamas and niyamas. Now, I can give one proof. You can read the life of any great saint or mystic of any tradition. You find in their teachings and life, all these 10 qualifications reach their perfection. That's important. Yama and niyamas. We can see non-violence. A violent person cannot be a saint, and the saint cannot be violent. Both cannot go together. A person who is always trying to steal somebody's property cannot be a saint. So ahimsa, okay. Asteya, natural. So then asatya, a saint or mystic should be truthful. That's natural. That's the essential fundamental quality. Brahmacharya, pure life, that is a must. In all higher religions, wherever a spiritual practitioner tries to reach out to the transcendental, this is essential. And the last one is aparigraha. Aparigraha doesn't mean that you don't receive anything. See, Buddha himself used to go about begging food. Buddhist monks is one of the teachings in the Abhidhamma. So Buddha's teaching, Dhamma, the Tripitaka, Sutta Pitaka, Vinaya Pitaka, Abhidhamma Pitaka. The Vinaya and Abhidhamma, you find Buddha talks about the disciplines for Buddhist bhikshus. Even today you find in countries which are predominantly Buddhist, like Thailand and other countries, Buddhist monks go about begging. So somebody may ask the question, it is not against aparigraha. Aparigraha means a natural tendency to go after things and to possess things. So it says in the greed, that is what is meant here. Not you. It doesn't mean that you should not receive anything from anybody. Nobody can live in this world. So what it means is freedom from greed. Naturally, it is a qualification that you always find, it is quality that you always find in any person, higher spiritual person you find. These 5 disciplines called yamas, ahimsa, satya, asteya, brahmacharya, aparigraha. Then the second one is shaucha, santosha, tapaswadhyaya, isapanidhana. Means inner purity, outer purity, contentment. If there is a mystic who is always dissatisfied and bitter and skeptical, he is not a mystic. Many mystics, at least in Christian tradition, they received recognition only post-mortem. I mean, mostly after death, they were recognized. Many of them had to go through, at least many of them, not all, of course. There were many who were recognized right in their lifetime, but many of them had to. Therefore, the canonization took place always after death. Now the point is, but in their life they must have experienced many things, sometimes even tortures from the hierarchy. But they had no problem. They were always contented because they were getting something, they were identifying with themselves with something transcendental that gave them complete Chantosa, the second niyamas. Tapaha means you focus your mind and your senses, your concentration everything in one direction. Chittaigagriyam manatapaha means the senses, mind, intellect all focusing in one direction with a sense of sanctity and sacredness. Naturally, it was characteristic of all great mystics, all traditions. So, then of course a sense of resignation to God. It's natural. In fact, that's what actually enabled them to go through many of these unpleasant experiences. So, now the point is, if a person gets established in yamas and niyamas, then actually other asana, pranayama, pratyahara. Again, I should emphasize the point. Here asana doesn't mean yogic postures, physical exercises in yoga. It means the ability to sit with great concentration in one place for a long time with a perfect relaxation. The sthiram sukham asana. So that's an idea behind. So through this process, a person realizes his highest. So in short, first through the practice of yamas and niyamas and yoga practice, you get viveka jnanam. Then all vitthana samskaras are completely transcended because you get viveka jnanam. Viveka jnanam, the discerning wisdom, helps you to neutralize all vitthana samskaras, obstructing samskaras and tendencies, and then you get to establish nirodha samskara. Then a yoga practitioner has to go even beyond nirodha samskara, and at that stage he reaches samprajnata samadhi. So this is the process that is mentioned here. Now I think it must be clear to you what is hanam. So we have already discussed 27th sutra. Next one is 28th sutra. 28th sutra is prasankhyane api akusidasya sarvatha vivekakyatehi dharmamekha samadhihi. So what happens when you reach a state of total, complete desirelessness? I mean, a state of desirelessness of the highest state. So that is the 28th sutra. What it means is, when a person reaches that kind of prasankyana I mean that highest spiritual wisdom in yoga, when you reach there, then you are not even attached to that. So you have reached the highest state of discerning wisdom, but you are not even attached, you have no attachment even to that state. Then only you reach perfection in that state. So the total renunciation of even the results of the highest spiritual enlightenment and wisdom. And when you are able to practice this detachment, even to that highest experience, then what happens? Dharmamekha samadhi. That means then what happens is, you reach a samadhi, and samadhi is called dharmamekha. What it means is, mekha is clouds, and clouds pour down power, water during rains. So just like clouds start raining, like that, this state of experience, it starts pouring virtue, enlightenment. It means it's a manifestation, complete manifestation of spiritual enlightenment. Maybe perhaps we can have a look at Vyasa's commentary on this sutra, brief, but it is important in some ways. It's important. Prasankhyane api akusidasya sarvatha vivekakhyadehi dharma meka samadhihi. This is Sutra. So prasankhyana, I mean this vivekakhyadi, it gives us this great siddhi, this great state of concentration called dharma meka. So one should remember always. Some students ask this question, so is it at one stage? Now I reach another stage, just like go to school, first grade, second grade, third grade. It is not that kind of graded evolution. Actually, when a person gets established in yamas and niyamas, then you won't notice how fast or how you are actually evolving. Spiritual evolution is not a graded process. One should remember. Spiritual evolution is a natural, spontaneous process. You cannot draw a line of demarcation. From now onwards, it is sampragnata, and after this, it is asampragnata. There is no clear bifurcation, there is no line of demarcation. We try to logically, mathematically analyze the spiritual journey, and that only shows that we have not even started the journey. If somebody thinks that I should get a graded, clear-cut picture, then only it's okay when you are traveling from San Francisco to Sacramento, but not in spiritual life. In spiritual life, there is no clear-cut line of demarcation or differentiating one stage from another stage. So here it says, Bhashim, Yadayam Brahmanaha Prasankhyane Abhi Akusidaha. Akusidaha means he has no desire, totally desireless. Such a person, he is totally disinterested even in this omniscience, this higher enlightenment. And when he becomes totally established in total detachment, he is totally disinterested, even in the highest state that he has reached, then only he attains total enlightenment. And when this happens, he reaches a state of samadhi, it's called dharma meka. So, prasankhyane api akusidaka. He is not even interested. He is not attached or obsessed with his higher state. To be very frank with you, one important characteristic of a true yogi is he may talk about many international subjects, but he will not talk about his own spiritual journey. I have a kundalini. You find frequently often in classes. Fortunately, I would say it's also a great learning occasion for me. People write emails, they come here, they say they have reached the kundalini up to this stage, now what next? And we have already reached one stage, and that only, you have to be patient, you have to be very, very sympathetic, then you have to explain to them. And some people come and tell we had a vision of Shiva. They read a book and then at night they dream and they think Shiva appeared to them. This happens to many people. So one should remember that if a person makes a proclamation about his spiritual achievement, there's a clear proof that he has not even started his journey. That is an important. If you want any proof that a person has not even started his journey, he can only this proof. I mean, he's sharing his experience and all these things. So this is an important thing to remember. That's why this sutra is very important. So akusida means a person who is totally disinterested, totally detached to his own spiritual experience. Even that person alone gets this real knowledge. It's an important thing to remember. So that's why tatopi na kinjit prarthayate. And he's not praying, he doesn't want anything. He doesn't want anything. Na kinjit prarthayate tatrabi viraktasya sarvatha vivekakyatihi evas bhavati iti. Similarly, that person gets total freedom from wants. That's the meaning here, Viraktasya sarvatha vivekakhyati. Virakta means a person who is totally detached completely. So, yes, accomplished the highest, but himself is not so much bothered about that. He's not too much worried about it. In fact, in a way that is true even if you stretch your imagination a little further, even in empirical knowledge, suppose a great scientist, does he go about telling them, I'm a great scientist? Very rich man, very rich person, maybe a billionaire, trillionaire, he goes, oh, I'm a very rich man, a very highly educated scholar, does he go, I'm a great scholar? The very fact that he wants others to know that he's a great scientist, he's a scientist, but not a very great scientist. Maybe a scientist, but not very great. So when you actually reach a very high level of perfection or achievement, then you are very reluctant to admit your own achievement. In fact, that's a proof of the fact that he has gone a little beyond the empirical, the normal level of achievement. This is a great artist. He won't go about telling I'm a great artist. Actually, in advertisements, if we say, if you did Trader Joe's or any of these things are advertised, itself the advertisement itself is a proof that things are very good, but not as good as it is being advertised. Otherwise, there is no need for advertisement, really speaking. So, even in empirical field, you can see when you reach a very high level of perfection, then you are disinclined to show off or to proclaim, to make a statement about your achievement. That applies in a much more intense fashion in this particular context. That's why prasankhyanē api akusidaha. I mean, he's not even, he doesn't even identify himself with his great achievement. He's totally disinterested, he's detached. Tatopi na kinjit prarthayade. He doesn't want anything. Tatrabi viraktasya sarvatha vivekakhyatihi eva bhavaditi. So when the person reaches that state of omniscience, still he doesn't want anything, he attains the total freedom from wants. Then what happens is, iti samskara bijakshayat na asya pratyantirani upapadyate. Samskara bijakshayat. Because the seeds of all samskaras are totally gone, have disappeared, destroyed. I mean, even the seeds of desires are completely gone. So, he attains total freedom. If its seeds are only burned, that's not enough. Sometimes seeds may be kept away from fertile soil, but if they actually fall on fertile soil, it may sprout. So a person may be able to practice a lot of spiritual disciplines if the circumstances are favorable. That's fine. But if the circumstances are not favorable, then that person may not be able to meditate, because the desires are there, and desires can fall on fertile soil, and the sower of the seed parable, the New Testament you find. So, like that, if the seeds happen to fall on fertile soil, they may sprout. This is a great danger. But in the case of such an accomplished person who has reached the vivekakhyati and prasankhana, this higher spiritual attainment, he becomes totally free from all desires. For him, even the seeds of desires are completely destroyed. That's why samskara bijakshayat nasi pratyantirani upadyati. Therefore, what happens is, he is totally free from any of these problems, and then because of this total destruction of the seeds of even latent impressions, no other cognition, no other intellectual process happens in his mind. No other cognition ever arises in his mind. and he attains a state of samadhi which is called dharmamekha. Tada asya dharmamekho nama samadhi bhavati. At that time he attains this state of dharmamekha samadhi. Mekha means cloud. Dharmamekha means cloud that actually pour dharma, virtue. I mean, that person gets fully established. As I mentioned earlier, such a person cannot but be a great good man. Fundamental human goodness is the essence of spirituality in yoga. Why? Because that person is fully established on the rocky foundation of yamas and niyamas. So this is an important thing to remember. Now we can have interaction. You are most welcome to ask questions. You can. Okay. Thank you. You are most welcome to ask questions. Yeah.
Kathleen first. Go ahead, Kathleen.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Yeah.
I've been wondering about the word discrimination. It seems to me that the mind is needed for discrimination.
Yeah.
You need to observe and then evaluate, and then through inference, logic, so forth and so on. But according to this, the mind is becoming more and more quiet in this process. And you said a few classes ago that at some point the Purusha starts reflecting on the yogi. And my sense is that closer that the yogi gets to Purusha or the Atman, that there's some sort of absorption taking place. And so I couldn't quite figure out, if the mind is quieting, how does this discrimination happen? Because it's still quite, even to the end here, the word discrimination is so important. And tonight I'm sensing that perhaps it's an experience. We're no longer, the yogi is no longer thinking, but it's more of an experience that's happening. And what's needed is a choice. It's just a question of choice, and that choice is renunciation or surrender to the Purusha or Atman.
You know, Viveka Khyadi, that's a technical word used in the yoga literature. That Viveka Khyadi is that word Viveka in that particular formation should not be translated to discrimination as we understand in the ordinary sense. So mind analyzes things and decides to do what is the right thing to do and avoid doing what is wrong. That is the normal the function of discrimination of many persons, the sense of discrimination, discerning wisdom. Now, here the Viveka Khyadi, in that word, the word discrimination is used in a different sense. That's a problem of language. There, the yogi is able to distinguish and eventually realize the fact that he is not one of the evolutes of Prakriti, and mind is one of the evolutes of Prakriti, and is actually Purusha. At that stage, his mind is not the mind that we normally have to use in our everyday life to discriminate as a discerning faculty. There, that mind doesn't have to go about discriminating one after another. See, when a person gets established in that higher wisdom, his mind doesn't have to be always alert to avoid going the opposite direction. He becomes fully established in that. So, Sri Ramakrishna uses an expert dancer doesn't make a false step. Sri Ramakrishna in the Gospels, an expert dancer. At the beginning, we need to be very careful. We have to think, we have to analyze, we have to discriminate and choose what is right and avoid what is wrong. That's important. But that kind of discrimination becomes totally irrelevant, unnecessary, when the mind gets fully established in yamas and niyamas. When the mind actually gets fully established in yamas and niyamas, that mind is of a different quality. And towards the end of Viveka Khyadi, that mind ceases to be mind. So remember, our mind evolves. The mind of a beginner in spiritual life has to function as a regulating principle, has to concentrate on discrimination. What is the right thing to do? You should avoid what is wrong. So you should stick to what is the right, what is proper. But when it reaches a higher level, that sort of discrimination becomes unnecessary and irrelevant, really speaking. And again, we are asking this question, logically we are trying to analyze what happens then, without actually reaching there. So that problem should be kept in mind when we read Yoga Sutras. Even a spiritual seeker gets fully established in, to some extent even, not fully, but to some extent, if he gets established in yamas and niyamas, that person's mind is of a different mind. That mind, different mind. See, he's established in Satya, the yama, one of the yamas. He's fully established in ahimsa, non-violence. He should not always think of avoiding doing harm to anybody, because it becomes mentally, psychologically impossible for him to do anything harmful to anyone. So he should not always, I should not hurt anyone. He should not do that. Buddha doesn't have to go about keeping himself away from any act of violence, because non-violence is second nature. He doesn't have to be alert to avoid doing anything violent, because non-violence is nature. He cannot do anything that is opposed to the principle of non-violence. He cannot do anything that is opposed to the ideal of non-violence, because he is fully established in ahimsa, non-violence. A person who is established in truthfulness, he should not always, I should not tell a lie. He doesn't have to be alert and watching his own mind. I should not tell a lie, because it becomes physically and mentally impossible for him to tell a lie. So that sort of change happens in the mind also. This is an important thing to remember. Yeah.
But even at the end stage, choices are needed to be made. I mean, choices are being made even here at this stage, yes?
In that journey, when you are climbing the steps there, actually, then this question will not arise. We are now trying to analyze and study this process of spiritual journey without actually reaching that stage. The questions we are asking now, we won't ask at that stage. That's an important thing to remember.
Yeah. Could you possibly spell the word viveka, the next word that comes after it that you were explaining to me? How do you spell it?
Oh, yeah, you mean in the sutra? Which sutra is it?
The viveka, the special kind, the other kind of viveka that you were telling me that.
Viveka, V-I-V-E-K-A, viveka. Viveka khyati, K-H-Y-A-T-I.
Thank you.
That's how, yeah. Viveka khyati. So, okay, thank you for the question. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Yes, thank you.
Should I go next, Swami?
Yeah, please go. Yeah.
You mentioned Chantosa, and I, of course, have heard that a lot. But could you explain, like, how does one practice Chantosa? You know, like you said, it's an antidote. Like one doesn't go with anxiety.
Yeah.
But how does one actually, just to say, I'm not anxious, doesn't actually make one not anxious. So how does one actually practice?
Yeah.
What are the mechanics of that?
Yeah, it has two levels. First, when we talk about practicing contentment, it implies that we should not we should not aspire for things without any discrimination. We should not indiscriminately keep aspiring for things. That's one meaning. But Santosa in its higher sense, in yoga sense, means you reach a state where you won't feel the need to aspire for anything else. That state of total contentment, where you won't feel the need to aspire for anything else. That state of total contentment. So that is a very high state of spiritual evolution. That's what a yogi is trying to achieve. A state where he won't feel the need for anything else. That is fully established in anything else. Total freedom from asteya, total freedom from aparigraha, and santosa. Santosa is a niyama, and asteya and aparigraha are niyamas, but they are interlinked. A person who practices total asteya. Asteya means literal translation should be understood first, the non-stealing. But that is only one fragment of the implications. What it means is we won't have any desire for things which are not ours, which belong to somebody else. Aparigraha means non-receiving of gifts, literal meaning. But means not having any possessive tendency, not having any greed. Now, these are attitudes of a person who is fully established in contentment. So you reach a state where you don't have any special aspiration for anything. So that's again not a kind of insensitivity. It comes along with a sense of total tranquility and peace. Such persons are not inactive or lazy or insensitive. They are capable of doing great things, achieving great things. Many of the great achievers in spiritual history, in history of spirituality, were great yogis. They didn't do anything for themselves, but they did great things. Even the temple.
Yeah. That's like Swami Vivekananda seemed to have lots of, not very much peace. Swami Vivekananda seemed very...
Swami Vivekananda's life was a drama that he was himself playing. Swami Vivekananda's life was a drama that he was playing. If you read Swami Vivekananda's life, Sri Ramakrishna's life, see, he wanted to remain in a state of samadhi all the time. The Sri Ramakrishna said, no, you have something to do. You have a great work to do. And then Sri Ramakrishna said, he gave him a state, he gave him a sample of the highest nirvikalpa samadhi when we just met during the early part of his life. Then Swamiji wanted to remain in that state. But Sri Ramakrishna told him, no, you have to do some work. Now, till you finish that work, I shall keep this state, this experience, hidden from you. I won't, he's been in a metaphoric language, he says, I shall keep it under lock. And it was the end of his life in 1902 in July. In the month of July 4th, Swamiji passed away. July 2nd he passed away. Now, towards the end of the month of June 1902, Swami began telling his disciples, now I feel it's all coming to an end. Now I feel my Guru has already unlocked the box. I now feel like the boy I was sitting, as a boy he was sitting in the Dakshineshwar temple in front of Sri Ramakrishna, listening to the stories from Sri Ramakrishna. His mind went back to those days, so with a sense of nostalgia. So Sri Ramakrishna was slowly unlocking the box. And then remember, Swamiji said even the organization is in Maya. So Vivekananda put his own life and all that he did, all his anxieties and worries and concerns for establishing the organization, everything, he put it within a bracket, within inverted comma. That was not a main theme of his life. It was within bracket, so to speak, if you understand what I mean. For Vivekananda, even this even the organization he built, the work he did in America and India, all this, in Europe, all that was just a comma. Sorry, all within bracket, not the main theme of his life. And he wanted to get out of it. Even he did not become the president of the order. He made his junior monk to mentor, and he himself kept away from it. But Swamiji, this was just an actor enters the stage playing a role and going away. The real actor is different. The one who is fully dressed up, made up, comes to the stage is different from the real person, the real man. So that's an important thing to remember. So all of Swamiji's worries and concerns for preaching Vedanta in America, preaching Vedanta in Europe, and even establishing an organization, and his own call to Indians to work hard to improve their own material laws, right? To spread modern education, to remove social injustices, eradication of poverty, all these. Swamiji's lectures, Colombo Delmora lectures, he reads like the lectures of a great revolutionary patriot, a social reformer. So you can find a dimension of his personality, which is the role, which resembles the role of a social reformer. So the point is, but then all for him was a drama. So unless we understand this aspect of Vivekananda, we won't get a full picture. If you sit here in America and think of Vivekananda as a great speaker who came and preached Vedanta and went away, you get only very small, tiny, insignificant fragment of his total personality and contribution. The real Vivekananda is far higher and bigger than the Vivekananda, the founder of the organization. Vivekananda just preacher. That's only one fragment of it. So for him it was all within Maya. He himself said, Vivekananda said in his own words, everything is Maya, including the work he did. So Sri Ramakrishna opened the box and he regained what he got when he was a teenager, when Sri Ramakrishna gave him the first experience of samadhi. Okay.
Can we say then that Vivekananda went beyond the Yoga Sutras, or is what he did sort of contained in them also?
Swami Vivekananda must have had all age experience mentioned in the Yoga Sutra. But Vivekananda was essentially a Vedanti. And so you'll be surprised when I tell you, all the great Vedantins were masters of yoga practice. Remember, it's an important thing. You won't find a single great Vedantic teacher from Shankara and also post-Shankarites who were not practitioners of yoga. If you go to Madhusudana Saraswati, the last dialectician in Vedantic tradition, who lived in 16th century, he elaborately discusses Yoga Sutras in his Gudartha Deepika, his commentary on the Bhagavad Gita. Shankaracharya wrote Vivarana, that is again a super commentary on Vyasa's commentary on Yoga Sutras. When we recite the second mantra, Stuve Patanjalim Vyasam Shankaram cha Munitrayam Kartru Sutrasya Bhashisya Kramad Vivaranasya cha. There, that sutra, that mantra, that Sanskrit sloga tells you, it says that Patanjali is the Sutrakara, the author of the sutras. And Vyasa is the Bhashyakara, the author of the commentary. Bhashya means commentary. So Patanjali wrote the sutras, Vyasa wrote the commentary that we read just now, and Shankaracharya wrote a commentary following the footsteps of Vyasa. That is called Vivarana. So Munitraya means the triple foundation of the three sages connected to Veda, to yoga tradition. Shankara is one of them. So you find not only Shankaracharya, even his followers like Vidyaranya, Madhusudana, they were all great masters of yoga. So, and another thing to remember, I mentioned this earlier, people sometimes feel pain when I repeatedly tell them that yoga finds its fulfillment only in Vedanta. It is a philosophical fact, it's a spiritual fact. That's an important thing. Because yoga is essentially a dualistic system a pluralistic system. But Vedanta, Advaita Vedanta is a monistic system. So yoga finds fulfillment only in Vedanta. That's why Vivekananda, arguably the most eminent practitioner of yoga in modern times, because he was the one who actually introduced yoga to Western world. He brought yoga outside Indian subcontinent. And that Swami Vivekananda himself, in his commentary, in his writings, he links yoga with Vedanta. So very often when he explained or described Purusha, he often links that Purusha ideal to the Atman ideal of Advaita Vedanta. On the other hand, if you read, other commentaries, they are very good commentaries, but they do not necessarily link yoga with Vedanta. Of course, great commentary like Vajaspati, Vijnana Bhikshu and others, especially Vijnana Bhikshu, he connects Yoga Sutra with many of our devotional literature like Bhagavad Gita and other ones. He Puranas and all he quotes. So this should be kept in mind. Yoga Sutra is a framework. In Indian philosophical system, everything is interlinked. That's important. Everything is interlinked. There is an integral approach to philosophy. Please, Bobby, please.
Yes, thank you, Swamiji. Sanjay, our host, has kindly asked me to ask the questions from the YouTube audience.
Yeah.
And there are a number of them, so in the interest of time, I'm going to group them thematically so that you can address them.
Yeah.
One is, what's the difference between manas and Bhuti?
Oh, yeah. Now, in certain sutras, mana and buddhi are used interchangeably. But according to in Patanjali's system proper, prakriti is the source of evolution. Then Mahattattvam. Mahattattvam is very often interpreted as cosmic intelligence. So, in that sense, it is Bhuti. And from that Mahattattvam, Ahankara. From Ahankara, for one aspects of Ahankara, mind emerges. From Sattvic Ahankara, mind emerges. From Rajasika Ahankara, the Panchatanmatras and the senses, Indriyas emerge. That's the idea behind. So, according to yoga system, Buddhi is a higher faculty compared to mind. But that is true in Vedanta also. But in the Sutra you find very often the word Buddhi may be used frequently to mean mind. So that problem is there. So we should remember this is an ancient book. So it's not. So you have, when you read it, you have to understand it in the light of the commentaries, just like Upanishads. Yeah.
Another similar question: are Dharma Mega Samadhi and Jivan Mukta the same thing?
Jivan Mukta is a higher state. Jivan Mukta is a state asamprajnata samadhi. It's going beyond this. Yeah.
Another question is, if we go from waking state into dreams, then how could we possibly eliminate chitta vritti and attain Nirodha Samadhi in the dream state also?
In dream state, we cannot do anything consciously. In dream state, we are actually in the hands of our samskaras, memories that we have built up during waking state. So, if somebody says in dream state, I want to speak, it is not possible. So you find, but dreams indicate where we actually stand. So you find in Sri Ramakrishna's life, some spiritual seekers and disciples, they came, and Sri Ramakrishna was very happy when some young disciples told him that they have some great dreams where they see sages, where they hear some sacred Om symbols and all that. Now so Sri Ramakrishna was very happy because he knew that means during their waking hours, they were actually meditating, thinking of higher things. That's why they had the great dreams, So that's a Sri Ramakrishna congratulates them actually. The reason maybe because we actually create the background for our dreams. Dreams are not duplications of waking state experiences, but they can never be totally detached from waking state experiences. In that sense.
Yeah. Another question: did Patanjali get the knowledge from self-inquiring, or was he influenced by ancient passed-on verbal knowledge?
We had to believe that Patanjali was a great saint who must have practiced the Vedantic teachings, and of course, one interesting thing I want to mention to you. That's a very it's a very fundamental difference. See, in modern times, if you teach Kant and you are called a Kantian, if you teach utilitarian philosophy, you are called a utilitarian. You write articles on Kantian philosophy, critical purism, you are called a Kantian. Then you have nothing to do with empiricism or classical philosophy, nothing, you are all exclusively. That kind of that approach did not exist in ancient India. That's why the great Shankaracharya, the Advaita teacher, wrote commentary on Yoga Sutras. So actually in many, see men like Madhusudana Saraswati, essentially he was a Vedanti. He wrote books on yoga and also even this Sadashiva Brahmendra Saraswati. He wrote so many things, Sanskrit poems, and he wrote on Yoga Sutras, he wrote on Bhakti, he wrote on Advaita, everything. So remember, great sages, saintly scholars in ancient India, they did not tag their names with any specific identity, no brand name. This is an important thing to remember. So Patanjali must have been a great Vedantin who wrote this great system. Kapila, for example, Kapila was a great Vedantin, really speaking. In the Bhagavata Purana, there's long Kapila Devahuti Sambhada, long dialogues of pure non-dualistic Vedanta. Kapila and his mother. So, and the same Kapila wrote this Kapila Sutras, the foundation of Sankhya system, which actually doesn't accept a creator God. So you can find all this. So Patanjali must have been a great Vedanti. Yeah.
Well, you mentioned in the, besides this idea of being a generalist as opposed to, a specialist in today's terms, you mentioned the invocation that starts the classes, and that Patanjali had mastered so many things.
Yeah. His contribution to Ayurveda, his contribution to Sanskrit grammar, the most elaborate Sanskrit grammar, Patanjali Mahabhashyam. He wrote, he just to give a clear description and definition of language, and he deals with the phonetics, he deals with prosody, he deals with different meters, he deals with the culture of using language, refinement, and the choice of words to express one's refinement and culture. So that means Yogena Chittasya Padena Vacham Malam Sharirasya Vaidagena Yoga Yaha Apakarot. Apakarot means who destroyed, who removed all the malam, all the dirt and filth from body. For that he wrote a book on Ayurveda, a commentary on Charaka Samskara, and to remove dirt from mind he wrote Yoga Sutras, and also to remove dirt and filth from speech he wrote the great work on Sanskrit grammar. So he was such a great versatile writer and philosopher. Yeah.
We can also assume that he was in that oral tradition that the questioner mentioned.
Yeah, yes. He was in those two traditions. Yeah.
Yes. So both. I guess the answer is both. The self-inquiry and the oral tradition were both at play.
Yeah.
But not to the exclusion of the whole array of the potential of human inquiry. That's really interesting. I'm glad we circled back to that.
No, that's an important thing actually. Many of them, not many, but most of them wrote books on so many different subjects. Yeah.
I'm looking for any additional questions. Sanjay, do you see any? No, he's shaking his head no. Well, thank you, Maharaj.
Thank you so much for the questions. Thank you. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Thank you,
Thank you, Maharaj.
Thank you,
Thank you, Swami.
Thank you, Swami.
Thank you.